feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. This webinar will feature interpretation in English, French, and Spanish. So you can click the globe symbol and choose the language you'd like to hear this webinar in. And again, we'll get started in a couple minutes here. Hello to folks joining us. Welcome to the Trinational call for cross-border solidarity. We'll get started in a couple minutes. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. And this webinar has simultaneous interpretation in Spanish, French, and English. So click the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen to choose the language.
Seeing some familiar names in the chat. Welcome. Nice to be here with you all. Looks like we have people from all over the countries.
Hello to everyone joining us. I think we're going to get started in like a minute. But thank you for trickling in. Thank you for being here. Keep introducing yourselves in the chat. Great to see how many folks are here with us. This is the Trinational call for cross-border solidarity. We'll get started here in just a minute. And again, a reminder that this call features simultaneous language interpretation in Spanish, English, and French. Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I know folks will likely continue to trickle in, but let's get started with our program. Hello and welcome to this Trinational call for cross-border solidarity in the face of rigged trade. My name is Julie Buana, and I am the director of the Washington Fair Trade Coalition, which is a coalition of Washington state labor unions, environmental organizations, migrant advocacy organizations, and other social justice organizations advocating for agreement. I am based in Seattle, Washington. I'm honored to be moderating this event today. Big thank you to our partners like the Trade Justice Education Fund, Global Exchange, the Trade Justice Network in Canada, and so many others for helping to put this on. Thank you to our speakers and our awesome interpreters as well. We're really excited to have you all join us today to hear directly from workers and organizers in Mexico, Canada, and the US about how corporate trade and government collusion have impacted communities across the three countries, and to join in their call for global solidarity. Like I mentioned, this event features language interpretation in Spanish, English, and French. To use this feature, please click on the globe interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen and select the language you would like to hear. This event is also being live streamed by Global Exchange in English and Rompeviento TV in Spanish, and those live streams will be in the chat as well. As we begin, I'd like to welcome a couple folks who will help us in leading our land acknowledgement. First, we have Yakowine Oaks, Snipe Clan Mohawk of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, founder and executive director of the North American Indigenous Center of New York. And then we'll have Grisel Bello Quequecha, who is a land defender for the indigenous Nahuatl community of Tlaxcala, and she belongs to the People's Movement for Peace and Justice. So Jacqueline, we'll start with you.
Sure, Yawangoa. Sego, my name is Yevwehina Oaks. I come to you as a Mohawk woman of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, speaking to you from Akwesasne, from within my homelands, and in responsibility to our people, our ancestors, and the generations yet to come. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge that we are all gathered across digital and physical space on the indigenous lands of the Americas, lands that have never been ceded in spirit and in many cases never ceded in law. From the Arctic to the Amazon, from the Caribbean to the Great Lakes, our peoples remain. We are still here. At the North American Indigenous Center of New York, our mission is rooted in culture, equity, and economic development, but more importantly, in the protection and continuation of Indigenous lifeways. We believe that our cultures are not relics, they are living systems of governance, such as the Great Law of Peace, the Guyana Goa, that our lands are not commodities, they are our relations. That sovereignty is not symbolic, it is actionable, inherent, and non negotiable. And that our survival depends on unity, not just among Indigenous peoples, but among all oppressed peoples navigating the same systems of extraction and control. Today's conversation about trade is not new to us. What is being framed as economic policy is, for Indigenous peoples, a continuation of colonial expansion through modern instruments. Trade agreements like USMCA are negotiated across our territories, impact our lands, regulate our economies, and yet exclude us. No consultation, no consent, no recognition of our jurisdiction. This is not just oversight. This is a violation of foundational agreements, including treaties like the Jay Treaty of 1794 and the principles embodied in the Turo Wampum, which affirm parallel paths of governance, not domination. The Jay Treaty of And while these conversations happen at the highest levels, the impacts are immediate on the ground. We are seeing environmental exploitation justified through economic development, land settlements in New York State that pressure our nations to cede homelands, agreements open our territories to corporate industrial extraction, continued erosion of our ability to govern, protect, and sustain our own lands. This is happening right now in Mohawk territory and across Turtle Island. It is not separate from what is happening in Latin America, where Indigenous defenders are criminalized and killed for protecting land. Middle East, where land resources and sovereignty remain under violent tyrannical colonization. These are not isolated conflicts. They are all connected through the same systems: resource extraction, militarization, and economic control. So when we talk about solidarity today, we must be clear. Solidarity is not symbolic, it is strategic. It means refusing to be divided by borders imposed on our lands, in narratives that pit workers against worker, nation against nation, building alliances rooted in shared survival, not competition. And for Indigenous peoples, it also means asserting clearly there can be no legitimate trade, no just economy without Indigenous consent. We are not stakeholders, we are nations. We are not interest groups. We are people with inherent rights, laws, and responsibilities that predate the states and their agreements. So today I call for full inclusion of Indigenous nations in all trade negotiations affecting our lands, recognition of free, prior, and informed consent as a non-negotiable standard, protection of our lands from extractive agreements disguised as development, and a unified front across borders, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike, to challenge systems that prioritize profit over life. Because at the end of the day, this is not just about trade, this is about survival. And survival requires more than resistance. It requires coordination, clarity, and courage. Nyalakoa, gratitude. Let's stand together, not just in opposition, but in strategy, in unity, and the protection of what remains and what must continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. It seems like maybe we're missing Grisel. Tanya, let me know if I'm correct in that. But really important remarks here. It's so important to recognize the ways in which trade policy and economic policy are inextricably linked to Indigenous sovereignty, environmental protection, and solidarity. So thank you again, Yakuine, for those remarks. So with that, we will, I'm going to talk a little bit about our program before we get into it. So first, I'm going to frame our discussion with some context about the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or the USMCA, and our call for cross-border solidarity. We'll then hear directly from three workers and organizers on the ground in Mexico, Canada, and the US about the ways in which global economic policy and rigged corporate trade has impacted their organizing work and their workplaces and the communities on the ground. We'll then announce a Trinational sign-on letter that was recently sent to trade ministers in all three countries, demanding that working people and the planet be prioritized over corporate profits. We'll then have some time for Q&A. And finally, and very importantly, we'll discuss how everyone on this call can get involved in the campaign for cross-border solidarity against Trump's rigged trade policy. This, trade justice is a movement, and it happens through people power, and it happens, it can't happen without you. So just a few items before we dive in. Mentioned this before, but just again, so anyone is aware, this event features language interpretation in Spanish, English, and French. To use this feature, click the globe interpretation icon and select the language you would like to hear. Please use the Q&A feature throughout the event to ask your questions. Feel free to use the chat. We encourage you to use the chat to introduce yourselves and make comments throughout the program. But again, if you have any questions, to ensure that we get to those, please do use the Q&A feature. Finally, this event is being recorded, and a recording along with some of the resources and action items we will be discussing today will be sent out to all the registrants after the event. So with that, we're going ahead and we're going to get into it. So I'd like to start with a little bit of framing as to why this event is happening now. This call and the broader Days of Solidarity campaign is happening in the context of increasing attacks on working people across North America, especially by the Trump administration, with a particular attack on migrant workers. Of course, it's also happening in the midst of yet another war of choice in the Middle East and the rise of fascism globally. And with this daily barrage of war crimes and atrocities, we really can't lose sight of how rules governing the global economy are being set right now. They're rigged in ways that help billionaires and corporations, often to the detriment of working people, family farmers, and the environment. And these rules are being set through international trade policies, an inherently intersectional issue that requires sustained cross-sector and cross-border coalition building and solidarity work. That's why we're here. We know that all systems of oppression are interconnected. Our migrant neighbors, who the Trump administration is abducting and deporting without so much as a hearing, a lot of them are here because of the economic devastation of free trade and corporate power in their home countries. The workers who are fighting in workplaces and on the picket and strike lines for a living wage are up against corporate monopolies with endless union busting capacity, empowered by trade rules that discourage workers' rights. Farmers working to feed their communities across the three countries are up against a corporate agricultural model that prioritizes profit over people locally and across the region. The tech surveillance and rise of discriminatory artificial intelligence used for everything from criminalizing our borders to erroneously flagging military targets is being made possible by giveaways to big tech and trade agreements. The destruction of our environment is compounded by a free trade system that gives corporate polluters the ability to sue governments for common sense climate policy. And that's just the beginning, right? Trade impacts everything, and all of these systemic inequities are exacerbated by inequitable trade policy. And at the same time, these very corporations who hold the power and who attempt and often succeed in rigging trade policy are also spending a lot of money to pit working people against each other so that we are looking anywhere but up. And we've had enough. And that's what really inspired this greater call for cross-border days of solidarity. Like I mentioned, as we speak, the governments of the US, Mexico, and Canada are actively negotiating new rules for the global economy under the US Mexico Canada Agreement, or USMCA. The Trump administration and others are pushing a rigged trade agenda that puts the interests of billionaires and corporations ahead of people on the planet, in North America and beyond. And again, this has very real consequences. A report recently came out that showed that NAFTA, or the North America Free Trade Agreement, which was kind of the predecessor to the USMCA, literally shortened Americans' lifespans by, on average, a year, but sometimes more. So this is literally life or death. And so, in response to all this, people are coming together across borders and across issue areas to say enough. In May and June of 2026, this year, activists and civil society organizations in the US, Canada, and Mexico will be mobilizing under the banner of Days of Solidarity, which demand that governments prioritize the needs of people and communities ahead of corporate profits, that reject this attempt to pit working people in the US, Mexico, and Canada against one another, and that demonstrate that communities across North America have shared interests. So today we'll get to hear from folks on the ground about how rigged trade, including the USMCA, has impacted jobs, wages, family farms, immigrant rights, and the environment in communities across the three countries. And importantly, how those very same communities are pushing back and calling for cross-border solidarity. So we'll now get to hear from some of those folks on the ground. Again, as questions come up, please do use our Q&A feature. We'll get to as many of those as possible later in the program. To introduce our three speakers, I would like to first introduce Victor Quintana Silveira, who is a distinguished Mexican sociologist, researcher, and former professor at the Autonomous University of Ciudad Juarez, specializing in rural studies, agriculture, food sovereignty, peasant movements, and climate change. Victor, please take it away and introduce our speakers.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Merci beaucoup, Julie. I'm going to in Spanish. See, well, or can I speak in French? You wish, or English. Okay. Okay. Es para mí un verdadero privilegio.
This is a real privilege for me to be able to introduce three fighters, people that come from the ground up, incredible people from three different countries in North America, three people that know firsthand the situation of workers in the three countries, in the respective countries. They know the workers' struggles, their problems, as well as their resistance, their solidarity, their sovereignty, and their dreams. So it's a pleasure to introduce, first of all, Rosario Ortiz Marayon from Mexico. Rosario Ortiz Marayon is co-founder and co-director of the network of women unionists. She creates spaces for women in a very masculine or machista environment. She creates spaces for women's organizations. She was a member of numerous union and civil rights or social rights organizations in Mexico. She's behind a lot of legislative reforms that have been advanced throughout the country. We have Victor Beato with us today as well. He is a worker in Ontario, Canada, Brownton.
Él es el presidente de la Junta
He is president
1255 del
of the
UNIFOR,
2025 Union
sindicato llamado UNIFOR, que trabaja en la
Council, Directive
planta de
Council,
ensamblaje Stellantis. Vito Beato,
connected to
ayer que lo
the
busqué en Google,
one of the
hay un
unions in
otro Vito
Canada.
Beato que es un entrenador de
Victor
soccer
is
uruguayo.
also
Afortunadamente,
a
Vito
soccer
Beato es
aficionado,
una persona muy de base.
and
Es un combativo
he
trabajador de
comes
esta
from the
planta
ground up.
de ensamblaje de Jeep en Canadá,
He works
cuyos
in
puestos de
Jeep
trabajo
assembly
han sido
plants and the union
puestos
there
en
in
pausa
Canada.
y especialmente
Their
amenazados
work
por
right
el
now has been
presidente
paused.
Donald Trump.
It's been challenged by
Al
or
detenerse el
weakened.
trabajo,
The economy has
ese
their
lugar
economy
de
has been weakened
Ontario,
because of Trump's
Vito
legislation
y su sindicato
taxing.
han luchado para que se reabra.
Victor
Y ellos
has
señalan que
struggled
las
to make
personas
sure that
trabajadoras y sus
the plant
familias
stays open,
están ansiosas por
and
trabajar y por producir más y los mejores autos.
he's here to talk about the
Finalmente,
concerns and
aquí
the
nuestros
struggles
vecinos
of the families
de la
in
frontera,
this community. And then
presentamos a la compañera
at the
Hilda
border,
Villegas.
we have
Es de la
Hilda
Mujer Obrera,
Villegas
una
from
organización de
Mujer
El Paso, Texas, a la que
Obrera,
yo conozco
Women's
y le tengo
Workers in Texas.
mucho cariño. La Mujer Obrera, fundada desde
Mujer
1981
Obrera, founded in 1981
por activistas como
by
Hilda,
activists
del
like
barrio,
Hilda,
del barrio El Chamizal, ahí
grassroots
en Ciudad Juárez, pero
activists
también
from Juarez and
activistas de la
the region,
industria del vestido.
and
O sea,
also
junto
workers
a la
from
compañera
the
¿sí?
clothing industry.
Es una activista que también está muy cercana, como su organización,
Hilda
a todos los
works
problemas
very
de la madre
closely
tierra.
with issues
Entonces,
impacting the
tenemos con
environment,
mucho
Mother
orgullo
Earth,
estos tres
and
ponentes ahora,
we're very
tres
glad
personas
to
de
have
lucha,
these
tres
three
personas de
panelists
solidaridad,
without today,
de
these
sororidad,
fighters, the warriors
tres
that know how to
personas
show
de
solidarity,
cercanía a la madre tierra
and
y en
will
lucha
talk to
continua
us
por
about
la
our
justicia.
connections to
Eso
Mother
para
Earth
esta
and the
semana.
need
Muchas
for
gracias.
a justice struggle.
Gracias,
Thank
Victor.
you.
Thank you, Victor. I will
Thank you,
now pass
Victor.
it off to
I'll give the
Rosario
microphone
for her
now to
remarks.
Rosario for her remarks.
Gracias. Quisiera pues agradecer
Thank you.
mucho estar aquí con
I want
ustedes
to
intercambiando
thank you for this
pues
opportunity
una
to be
serie de
with you, to
reflexiones que hemos
exchange
hecho en el
different
transcurso
perspectives, or
de muchos años,
exchange
todas las
our thoughts.
organizaciones que hoy nos agrupamos
For
a
many years,
nivel
our organizations
internacional
have come
para
together at a
tener una
trinational level
postura
in
de
order to
clase,
take
una postura
a
que
class
nos
position,
permita tener una perspectiva para
a
enfrentar
position
los
that reflects
profundos cambios que hoy se están
our
presentando y que están
situation of confronting
dados en un
major
marco
problems
que
that are
atenta
challenging
contra los
us
derechos humanos de todas
and
las personas que
resisting
estamos ahorita
structures that challenge
conectadas, pero
human
que
rights.
tiene un
Everyone that's
impacto a
here
nivel
today
mundial, todos los
understands that this has a
cambios que se
global
están
impact.
haciendo
All of the
de una
changes that we're
manera muy
seeing
violenta y que nos
and
están
which are being carried
imponiendo
out violently,
una dinámica en la
it's the
que
imposition of a new
tenemos que
dynamic.
estar de manera conjunta,
And so we have
hombres,
to stand
mujeres,
together,
trabajadores y trabajadoras de
men,
todos los
women,
sectores
workers of all of
laborales
the
y de
labor
academia
sectors,
para
from
poder dar una
academia
respuesta
and other sectors,
contundente y
must come
que
together
logremos
to respond.
abrir los espacios de diálogo que hoy tenemos pues
We
cerrados,
encourage
cuando
opening up
menos en el
spaces for
país que es
dialogue,
México.
particularly in Mexico.
De manera muy sucinta, quisiera darles
Very briefly,
que
I'd like to
desde el
mention
acuerdo del
that
Telecan que se firmó
the
en
telecom
1994,
agreement from
en México hemos
1994,
tenido
NAFTA,
impactos muy
since
graves
then we've
en muchos
experienced
sectores, en
really
el sector agrícola, en el sector
significant
laboral,
impacts in the
en la
agriculture and the
parte
labor sector.
de las grandes empresas o de los grandes proyectos que han
This in
invadido
relation
la
to
tierra, que
the
han
large
ido
projects that have invaded our lands,
acorralando a las grandes
that have
comunidades
corralled
de
in
poder acceder
communities
a los derechos básicos como
and
es el agua
prevented them from
y la tierra.
exercising
En el
basic
plano
rights,
del
having
tema
access
laboral,
to
que es
water and land.
la parte que me ha tocado acompañar, y ya mi compañera que va a hablar de
I
la
will be
parte obrera,
focusing my
pues hemos de
remarks.
estar coincidiendo que el acuerdo comercial no trajo
The free trade
beneficios
agreements,
para las y los trabajadores en el país.
we understand that
En
it doesn't
México
benefit
se
all
abrió
workers in
un
the country. In
proyecto
Mexico,
llamado Maquilador
there
desde
was
los
the
años 80
Malicador project,
que ha
which developed
significado
since
una
the
forma
1980s,
de
and
explotar la mano de
it's been
obra
used to exploit
mayoritariamente de las
the
mujeres, y
labor,
que
to exploit
fue
workers,
dándose respuestas de lucha muy fuertes ante
and
la
people have had
forma
to
en
come
que se
together
venía
to
trabajando
resist
el tema
all of the
de los
transformations,
proyectos laborales en
everything
México.
that
Y este
has to
proceso
do
se ha
with
ido
collective
recorriendo
projects
en
or
todo el
large
país,
projects in Mexico
y
has been
que
impacted.
ahora en estas condiciones de desigualdad
We
y
now have greater
de
inequality
negociar acuerdos comerciales totalmente
and the capacity to negotiate in these
desequilibrados
agreements.
entre los países,
It's
porque no
not a
estamos en las mismas
level playing
condiciones
field.
de desarrollo
We're in
económico,
different
de tener políticas
stages of
salariales,
economic
de abrir
development in terms of
espacios
our
para que las mujeres
salary
podamos participar
ranges,
cada vez
the
más en los lugares donde
opportunities for
estamos,
women to
con la
engage,
garantía de no sufrir violencia, ni violencia
the right to
política,
not
ni
have to
laboral,
experience
ni de ningún otro
violence,
tipo,
political
porque
violence, or
esto es
physical
a lo que ha
violence.
ido
These,
teniendo como
all of these
resultado
things
parte de estos
we
acuerdos
are
comerciales.
concerned about,
En ese
and we've
tenor
had
se
to
abre
respond to
ahora
these
el
issues.
acuerdo de libre comercio que denominamos TEMEC, en
As far
donde,
as the USMCA is concerned,
donde no existe reciprocidad
we see
en
that
los
there is a lack
mecanismos de
of
negociación.
reciprocity
Estamos
when it
siempre
comes
en una
to the
disparidad
response
de
mechanisms.
fuerza
There's a great
económica, de
disparity
fuerza
here,
organizativa,
which
y
reflects
y que en nuestro país abrir
also
el
the level
diálogo
of our organizing
con las
capacities and
autoridades
our
competentes para
current conditions.
colocar nuestras propuestas ha sido
These mechanisms
una
where we can
situación
bring
muy
our
difícil,
complaints
de
or
tal
the
manera que
conflicts to,
hemos
it's all been
colocado
very difficult
en
process.
México este espacio que hemos logrado
In
consensuar
Mexico,
con
we've been able to come
ustedes en Estados
together
Unidos y en Canadá,
with
y que esa
you, the
declaración nos
organizations
vaya a
here today
permitir
in the
tener un
United States and
posicionamiento
Canada,
político en México con el
and
respaldo
that's
de
going to
todas las
allow us to have a
organizaciones
unified
de los
voice
tres
and to
países que
have the
van a
backing of all of
respaldar
our
este
organizations.
documento. Y nos preocupa
And
que se
that's
abran
and so we're
negociaciones sobre
engaged
el
in these
TEMEC,
negotiations.
y los trabajadores, las organizaciones de sociedad civil
I am
de todos
concerned
los
that workers and
espacios
civil
que estamos
society,
reflejados en este
actors
documento,
from
no
the different
hayamos tenido
sectors
ninguna
that are
posibilidad
reflected
de
in the
abrir un
document,
espacio
I'm concerned
de
that we
diálogo,
haven't
de
had an
colocar
opportunity
nuestras
to
posturas, nuestra
engage in a
visión
dialogue
de cómo
that
revisar un
allows us
acuerdo
to
comercial no
present a
recíproco y en las
vision
desigualdades en las que nos
for a
encontramos,
different type
pues va a
of free trade
tener
agreement,
un impacto
because
mucho
with
más
this
fuerte para nuestro país en
non-reciprocal,
general, pero en
this
especial para los
contract right now
hombres y
that lacks
mujeres que
reciprocity,
estamos en los diferentes sectores que hemos venido colocando
particularly
nuestra
women that
visión
are
crítica,
active in the
nuestras
different
propuestas,
sectors in
porque
these different
además somos un
markets.
espacio colectivo donde hacemos un balance crítico, pero siempre tenemos las
We see
propuestas
the
para
need to
tener
respond
alternativas
because we
entre la
have
situación que tenemos.
alternatives.
Y es
We possess
en ese
that
contexto
knowledge.
en que el tema de las mujeres lo estamos colocando de una
And
manera
that's
pues
also
muy
why we're
fuerte,
focusing
porque en el
on
acuerdo comercial
gender
que ahora
issues
entra en
or
revisión, no
women's
hemos
issues.
logrado colocar que se reconozca el
We have
tema de la
yet not been
discriminación
successful
y
in
la
having
violencia con las
discrimination
mujeres en todos los
recognized,
espacios que tenemos para
that
colocar
it exists
realmente
in all of the
un acuerdo
spaces.
comercial de mayor, con una visión integral
And so
desde la
there's a need
perspectiva de
for
derechos humanos
a
y la
broader
perspectiva de género.
revision
Y
of
es en
the
ese
free trade
contexto
agreements
en el que
that
nosotras hemos estado
privileges
y
a human rights
nosotros
perspective.
colocando en este documento y en documentos que fuimos
In this
entregando a
document and
las
also
autoridades
throughout
competentes,
the process,
propuestas donde
we've
estamos
engaged the
colocando
authorities, we've
una
presented different
visión crítica,
proposals
pero
which
proponiendo
reflect
una serie de elementos que nos
critical
permitan
engagement, but
tener un
also
avance
productive
en toda
engagement
esta revisión. Y
with
es ahí
the
donde
current
nosotras y
revisions.
nosotros pensamos que
We believe then
buscar el espacio de diálogo es fundamental.
that
No
engaging in
podemos tener
dialogues
una
and creating
revisión de un
these
acuerdo
is
comercial de esta
fundamental.
magnitud
we
si no
can't talk,
tenemos un diálogo
carry
abierto y
out a discussion of
transparente
this
con las
magnitude,
autoridades para
and
que
we can't
escuchen
engage
cuáles son
effectively with the
nuestras
authorities
propuestas que hemos venido construyendo a
if
lo largo de todos estos años y que se concretan
if
en este documento.
we don't follow
Es
the
en
entirety of the
ese sentido
process and
que
engage it
nosotras y nosotros
directly.
estamos tratando de colocar este documento con muchas
And
organizaciones,
so
incluyendo
we
la
will be
parte de
taking
los
this
sindicatos,
document
que es un
to many
espacio
other
que
organizations
se
and
está
other
abriendo,
unions.
pero que todavía
We are
falta
opening up
trabajar con
space.
más
We're
para que
moving forward,
puedan tener una incorporación
working
y colocar
eagerly
la
to
fuerza que se
incorporate
tiene cuando son
new
sindicatos que han
actors
venido participando. Y
and
ahí es donde
also
nosotras y nosotros nos
recognizing the
encontramos
unions that have
para
already been
tratar de
involved.
construir una revisión de este acuerdo
We want
comercial
to carry
con
out a
mayor
revision of the free
equidad
trade
entre
agreement,
las partes, con mayor
bringing in the
reciprocidad
issues of
para
equity,
tener
more
un resultado que
reciprocity
beneficie a la
that
población
allows
mexicana.
people to have
Hoy tenemos
positive
políticas
benefits
de empresas
for
globales
Mexican
que llegan a nuestro
communities
país
to see
violentando
benefits.
todos los derechos humanos que están colocados
Also,
y que eso invalida o tratan de invalidar que la
the
organización
situation with
de
human
la
rights and the
sociedad
way
civil
it's
no
discussed
tenga
in the
el
document,
peso
they
político
try
que nosotros
to
estamos tratando de colocar. Entonces,
they don't make
en
space for that,
ese
and we're
sentido,
trying to respond
es
to that. We're trying
como
to bring them
nosotras
in
y
into
nosotros vemos desde
human rights
México
into the
la
document, even
urgencia
though
de poder abrir
that
el diálogo para
it hasn't
colocar
been
nuestras
like that. They
propuestas,
haven't functioned
tener una
for that.
incidencia política de mayor
We
fuerza,
believe
de
that we
mayor
need to have
contundencia
stronger
y
advocacy
que la
power
revisión del TEMEC en los
in these
capítulos que
proceedings, in these
tenemos cada
revisions,
uno de nosotras y
particularly
nosotros
in
colocados
relation
y
to
podamos
the
tener
chapters that
una
interest our
incidencia
particular
para colocar nuestros
constituents.
derechos humanos
This is an
de
opportunity
género,
to bring in human
de
rights, gender
igualdad entre
rights
hombres y
into
mujeres,
this process
que refleje
to promote
una
gender
condición
equality
diferente en un
and
acuerdo
to
comercial como el
seek
que estamos
different types of
negociando.
results
Les agradezco mucho
in
y
these
les mando
types
un
of free trade
abrazo
agreements.
solidario.
I send everyone a warm embrace, a hug in solidarity.
Gracias, Rosario. Thank you so much, Rosario. That was really great insights. Really appreciate that. Next, I will pass it to Vito, who again is an auto worker in Brampton, Ontario. He's the rank and file president of Local 1285. So Vito, I will pass it to you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, my name is Vito Beato, president of Unifor Local 1285 in Brampton, Ontario, Canada. And good evening, everyone. I want to thank the organizers for the invitation to speak with you all tonight. I send greetings and solidarity from the members and the executive board of Unifor Local 1285 in Brampton, Ontario. For those who don't know, Unifor is the largest private sector union in Canada, representing 320,000 members. Local 1285 is an amalgamated local union, chartered back in 1961, representing over 8,000 members. The majority of our members are in the auto industry, 3,000 workers at the Stellantis Brampton Assembly Plant, and over 1,000 members in the independent parts supplier base. I also send greetings from the Unifor Stellantis Council as well. I've been at the local for 9 years. So I was a first vice president for 6 years, president for 3 years, and just most recently acclaimed for another 3 years this month. So I cut my teeth with our union when I was hired back at the Chrysler Brampton Assembly Plant back in 1992. This plant, the Brampton Assembly Plant, is the industrial bedrock of the Brampton community. We've endured some of the darkest, most difficult times, including the 2009 financial crisis, the bankruptcy of Chrysler and multiple ownership changes, COVID shutdowns and chip shortages, and the complications and challenges that come with an EV transition. But I can tell you, without hesitation, I have never seen a crisis like the one the U.S. administration has inflicted. Our leadership before us has told us the same thing as well. 60 years ago, our two countries struck a deal to build cars in North America together. As part of the deal, Canada would allow US automakers to dominate Canadian car making. In exchange, more plants would be built in Canada in proportion to our sales, and jobs were created. The Auto Pact created a trading relationship that to this day is almost perfectly balanced, built on the foundations of good union jobs. But for the past year, the US administration has scapegoated Canada. President Trump says that we are the problem. He says he wants to bring auto jobs back to the US, but our jobs were never his to begin with. He says America doesn't need the cars Canada builds, even though the cars we build are filled with US content. He says we don't need to transition to EVs when the world is shifting to EVs and North America is being left behind. Trump has put 25% national security tariffs on Canadian and Mexican vehicles, breaking his own commitment in the USMCA. This raises the obvious question: what is the USMCA for? Whether you think the deal is good or bad, or whether we think it can be improved or not, is irrelevant. Not when one party can decide which parts it chooses to ignore. I think the 2026 review is in many respects a useless exercise. For as far as we're concerned, the deal is already dead. What's worse is that North American auto industry is in decline, and all thanks to President Trump. Investment is frozen. Jobs are in decline on both sides of the border. These are self-inflicted wounds and totally avoidable. Right now, 3,000 of our local 1285 members at the Brampton Assembly Plant, along with over 1,000 members in the independent parts supplier base, are now in their third year of layoff. This all has to do with tariffs and companies like Stellantis appeasing the US administration and moving investment and negotiated product from our Brampton Assembly Plant. Our members are being helped along by extraordinary income security benefits that our union has bargained back in 2023. Our plant is filled with equipment right now doing nothing but collecting dust. We negotiated a product and investment that should have our members back to work today and building cars today. We should have been building cars months ago. Our plant is ready to go. Our members feel betrayed. They feel betrayed by an employer who broke an investment commitment made in 2023 negotiations to build a next generation Jeep Compass. Our members are angry, they are scared, and they are scared for their future. Our union is doing everything in its power to get back to work into this plant. We've got round-the-clock monitoring of equipment. Nothing is leaving the plant, not a single piece of equipment, unless we say so. We've gotten our federal government to pressure Stellantis to live up its commitments. We've punished the company with counter tariffs, and there are active lawsuits that are pending. We've even gotten the city of Brampton to commit to changing zoning bylaws to ensure the land on which the plant sits can only ever be used to assemble vehicles. We head into our next round of bargaining with Stellantis this year, and job security is our core priority, and bringing work back to Brampton Assembly Plant is our top priority. The history there for the Brampton Assembly Plant at the end of 2023, we were building muscle cars, the muscle car Challenger, the muscle car Charger, that consumers in the US loved as well. And when we talk about an industry that's been integrated for a very long time, this is what we're talking about. We're not attacking residents. We're not attacking people. What we're talking about is how good we can be and work together. And when we were building these muscle cars that consumers in the United States were buying, they were reaching out to us. They reached out to leadership. They sent us letters. We shared with our membership, and the pride that they had and the joy that these consumers had, US consumers, for buying the muscle cars that were built in Brampton, Ontario, Canada by the end of 2023. So that's just a little bit of history. And here is the tragedy of what Trump has done. Because of really bad one-sided trade deals, our government has allowed global automakers to flood our markets with imported cars not built in North America. 5 million of them in 2024. That's approximately 20 assembly plants worth of vehicles. Instead of working alongside Canada and Mexico to solidify the North American region, because we build cars together, his tariff policy has punished us, and in turn has punished the US as well. Auto sales are down, investment is frozen, jobs are being lost, and the cost of building cars is rising. This is a tariff policy that will weaken American automakers, not help them. In turn, it will create more insecurity for auto workers. It will weaken the North American industry as a whole. If anything useful can come of this USMCA review, it is for working people to be at the forefront of this review, to come together and prevent this from happening and get us back to what we do best and build cars together. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Vito. Yeah, really important insights there. I think, it's important to remember who's really at the forefront, right? Who is actually being impacted by these trade agreements versus who's the ones in the room, right, making the negotiations. So really appreciate your insights and your experience on the ground there. Finally, I will pass it to Hilda, who's an organizer with La Mujer Obrera. So take it away.
Hi, hola. Mi nombre es Hilda Villegas y yo soy una de
Greetings,
las
I am Hilda Villegas, and
las
I'm one of the organizers.
líderes o the lead organizer
I'm a lead
within La Mujer
organizer
Obrera.
in
Y
the
ya
Union
tengo yo en la organización
Mujer Obrera
más de
network.
pues, casi 20 años
I've been involved
que
with this organization for
he
20
sido
years
parte
now.
de la organización. Y pues nosotros les podemos ofrecer
The things that we can
la
offer,
perspectiva del
as far as our
impacto
perspective is concerned,
que hemos tenido, pues se lo vamos a dar al respecto de nuestro trabajo
the
y de las
impacts, we see that in our work.
dentro de la mujer obrera que fueron
And Mujer
desplazadas
Obrera,
del trabajo que ellas hicieron después
we've seen a lot of women
NAFTA.
that have had to
Y pues
leave their
también
jobs. They were pushed out of their jobs
las nuevas
after
mujeres
NAFTA.
que han tomado la
And
iniciativa dentro
ne-
de
And
nuestros
since then,
esfuerzos
we've
que
seen
viven
a
en el
lot of
barrio
women
Chamizal y
take
también
more
pues
leadership
la nueva
in our
generación
campaigns
dentro de
and
la
our
mujer obrera.
projects,
Y
including
pues un
also
poquito de
a more active
contexto es
role in the development of
Barrio
Mujer Obrera.
Chamizal en la comunidad que
In
nosotros estamos
Chamizal, the
organizando
Chamizal neighborhood, in
son
the neighborhood where we're
entre
working,
7,000 y 8,000
we're
residentes
talking about 7
de
to
nuestra
8,000
comunidad.
residents in the community.
Muy cerca o estamos como quien dice ajuste
We're right next
al
to
puente libre que viene
the
siendo
free
el
bridge, Puente Libre, Libre Bridge.
internacional
That's the
del centro
international
del Paso.
bridge at El Paso.
También experimentó problemas después
We
de
saw
NAFTA, ¿verdad?
problems there
Entonces,
also
esta es nuestra comunidad.
related to NAFTA.
Durante la lucha por
And so this
defender los
community
derechos de las mujeres trabajadoras
has witnessed
y
this.
nuestro análisis del impacto que iba a
The
tener, ¿verdad?
analysis that we've
Perdimos 35,000
carried out, we
trabajos,
see
35,000 jobs.
35,000 jobs
Todos
have been lost.
documentados a través de las mujeres que fueron impactadas
This was
dentro de esa
documented
lucha, ¿verdad?
by
De lo
impacted
que
workers
yo tengo entendido es de que no hubo un esfuerzo
here locally.
para documentar ese impacto negativo. Todo fue a través de los esfuerzos de las mujeres que se estaban
It was the women
organizando.
themselves that had to organize the
Entonces,
documentation of
durante
this
ese
process
tiempo, pues
because
lo que
no
nos
one else was looking
prometieron
out for that.
nunca se cumplió y pues esos trabajos nunca regresaron. Y
The
las
promises
condiciones
to
aquí de este tiempo
revive
han
the
empeorado
economy and bring
para
back
las
those
trabajadoras, ¿verdad?
jobs,
En Barrio
those
Chamizal
promises
sigue
were not
siendo una
fulfilled. In
comunidad
Chamizal neighborhood,
de
that community
trabajadores pobres, de bajos
continues to be
recursos,
a
y la
low-income
mayoría
community.
de las viviendas son
Majority of
llevadas a cabo
housings,
por mujeres y sus hijos, ¿verdad? Y los hijos
majority
que
of
dependen
houses,
de
we're
esas
talking
mujeres.
about women and their children.
Los trabajos, como digo, nunca
And the
llegaron
jobs
para
that
atrás
are
y ahorita
accessible to
la
them, it's
competición
really
de
gone down.
trabajos es por trabajos muy malos pagados.
And what's left is
El
really
costo de la
badly
vida
paid
de
work
los residentes del Paso ha incrementado, la vivienda
because of the
ha
El Paso
incrementado,
connection.
y se ha hecho muy difícil
Housing
para
has
que
gone
las
up,
familias, especialmente dentro del chamizal,
and
que
families in
somos la
Chamizal,
mayoría inmigrantes de
the
habla
majority of
hispana,
them being
bajos
Spanish-speaking
recursos, podamos
immigrants,
sostener
low-income
un hogar
communities,
con la
we
miseria
wanted to.
de sueldo que nos ha tocado, ¿verdad?
It's very difficult to
En
make it
términos
work with
de
such a meager income,
beneficios, no hemos visto,
with
los
such a
trabajadores no
reduced
hemos
income
visto
that
nada.
we have access
Muy
to.
pocos han sido los que se han
We haven't
beneficiado
seen anything in terms of
y a diario
workers'
nos
rights.
recuerda
Very few people have seen any
esa
benefits.
era de lo que pasó dentro de la comunidad por estar cerca del Puente Libre.
And because we're
La
close
industria
to
que se movió a
the Libre
Juárez
Bridge or Free
sigue
Bridge,
muy presente en nuestra comunidad.
we see that
Los
industry
tiempos
continues to
antes
move
de
through.
NEFTA, pues estaban las
Before
fábricas,
NAFTA, we
¿verdad?
had
Y
the
cuando se
factories.
movieron a México, Juárez,
And then
pues
when they came
se quedaron
from
los edificios,
Juarez,
se
they came
convirtieron,
into
la
Mexico,
infraestructura que estaba dentro de nuestro barrio se convirtió
that
en
that
bodegas para
became
apoyar esas
infrastructure
maquilas,
in our
y
communities,
recicladoras que son
warehouses,
las que toman todo el desperdicio de las maquilas de Juárez.
and
Y al igual
all of the
muchos campos
discard, all of the
vacíos
refuse
donde
from these
vemos a
plants.
diario que
That's
los
what we
usan
get here.
para, para tener los truck bins, ¿verdad? Eso ha
All of the
causado
truck
un
bins are
tráfico
here.
tremendo dentro de nuestra
That
comunidad,
creates
exponiendo a las
a huge amount
familias
of
y a los
traffic
niños
and creates risks
a
for
altos
families
niveles
and
de
children.
contaminación por
There's a
las
very high
trocas,
level of
y al
contamination
igual
here
un
as a
deterioro de
result
la
of the
infraestructura
trucking.
vieja, que de por sí las calles no servían, ¿verdad?
And
Tenemos vivienda pública en donde los niños
there's
caminan a
public
las escuelas,
housing,
caminan a su casa, y pues tienen que estar sujetas a estas trocas
and these
que a
communities
diario ponen en
always have
peligro
to
sus
be
vidas. Um,
threatened by these trucks,
El
which
incremento del
are very
tráfico en el
threatening.
Puente Libre
So it's
incrementó por
completely
las diesel
changed
trucks.
the way that people live
Estamos
here and what
viendo
life
un
is like
promedio
here.
de 200 trocas a
About
diario
200
que
trucks
entran
a
y
day
salen
are
por
coming in
Puente Libre,
through the
que estamos
bridge,
viendo a unos pies de nuestras escuelas.
and that's just
La calidad del aire ha
feet
empeorado.
from
El Paso tiene un problema de ozono,
children's schools.
y al igual nuestra
We're
comunidad
seeing
está
similar
sujeta a altos
problems in
niveles
other
de
communities.
materia particular, ¿verdad? Y que ha causado
Also, as far as
asma,
the
enfermedades
elements,
crónicas,
the air
y
or
pues
the contamination, there's
estamos viendo
asthma
problemas de salud que
causing
no deberían de existir en
particles,
los niños, ¿verdad? Como
and we're seeing a
diabetes,
lot
alta
of
presión,
illnesses in the children, in the younger
depresión, muchas
generation,
cosas que están
depression,
asociadas con la
diabetes, high blood
cardiovascular.
pressure,
Al igual el medio ambiente, no hay inversión,
and
muy poca vegetación por parte de la
not a
ciudad,
lot of
y
vegetation.
pues
There's no investments in
lo que estamos
that
viendo es que también
type
la
of
ciudad se ha
uh,
olvidado de esa historia.
resources for
Como quien
well-being,
dice,
like
no existimos y no
green
existe la
plants.
historia de la pérdida
It's
de
like
trabajos. Entonces,
we don't
muchos de los
exist. Our
planes que ellos
story
están
of the
promoviendo
labor or the economy that we've
para
lost
mover El
isn't
Paso para
remembered.
que
No one,
progrese, porque la ciudad del Paso es
and
muy
so
pobre y no ha
El Paso
progresado en sí.
hasn't progressed from any of this.
Ataca a nuestra comunidad.
And these free trade
Siendo
agreements
una comunidad
attack our
trabajadora
communities.
pobre, pues no nos consideran en sus planes.
We're very poor, and so they're not
Sus planes
thinking
económicos
for
urbanos
us. They're not looking
ahorita
out
por
for
el
us.
centro de rehabilitar el centro del Paso, están
They focused on other sectors of El
diciendo, pues vamos
Paso,
a
and
gentrificar esta comunidad, vamos
people will talk about
renovar la
the
vivienda,
gentrification of
pero
particular
sin embargo no
communities.
consideran que la vivienda que está en el centro del Paso es la más
But
barata y es la que está apoyando a las familias pobres
they don't think about
inmigrantes.
what's happening in El
Entonces, al
Paso
quitarnos la
and how
vivienda,
that
a subir los precios del costo de
demographic
vida,
there keeps
también estamos viendo
the
que están
prices
cerrando
as they
nuestras
are.
escuelas, muy poca inversión en la educación para nuestros
But
hijos.
still, they don't consider us. We see
Entonces,
that they
pues
don't invest
no
into
hay
our
un
schools,
camino a
into our
mejores
children.
trabajos, a mejores carreras.
And so
Y
there
la
isn't any
discriminación se
way
ve muy
to
total en comparación a
connect
otras partes
yourself
del
to other
Paso, ¿verdad?
opportunities,
Siempre ha
even though so many
sido
things are passing
las
through El
comunidades
Paso.
de los trabajadores las que han usado
The
como su aval para saquear y pues también
communities
para
have been their
contaminar y
fodder.
para poner la
They
industria
get
que
their
apoya el
labor
comercio.
from the
Am,
communities, and
la
then they
mujer
throw
obrera hizo una
their
decisión de cuando
refuse
después que
there
se fueron
too.
los trabajos
There
nos
was a
dijeron,
woman after the first wave of
nos
jobs
dijeron
was lost.
que están peleando por los trabajos, nunca
They
van a
said
regresar.
Stop fighting for
Sigan los
these
trabajos.
jobs
¿verdad?
because they're not coming back.
Son gente migrante, sigan los trabajos.
Rather,
Y
follow the
nosotros
jobs.
decidimos quedarnos aquí
But what we decided
nuestro
is
barrio
we're going to stay
para
here.
luchar
We're going to stay in our
por la
neighborhood,
tierra y
Chamizal.
por la gente
It's
y
our
por nosotras.
land, it's our
Entonces, todo el
people,
esfuerzo de
and
la
it's
mujer
ours. We're
obrera
doing it for us
se ha
too.
convertido
And
en
so
resistir y organizar
we
las
have thus,
familias trabajadoras del chamizal,
our efforts
porque
have been
tenemos el derecho
geared
de
towards
quedarnos aquí en
resistance.
estas tierras.
We understand that we have the right to be in this land,
Y de
that,
sanar la relación con
and look for
con la
opportunities to
naturaleza y
heal
sanar la relación
in
entre
relation
nosotras
to
mismas
nature
como
and also in
familias.
relation
Entonces,
to each other and
hemos estado
ourselves.
peleando en contra de la industria que
So
apoya las
our struggle
maquilas, en
has been
contra
against
de
the
las
industry,
trocas que pudimos
the free
sacarlas
trade
del puente
agreement,
libre a través de la inversión del infrastructure
agreements,
bill que
and the way they impact the infrastructure.
que ahorita todavía están las maquilas de Juárez usando
In Juarez, they're still
nuestro
using,
lenguaje para seguir aquí, ¿verdad? Los políticos las siguen
they're following what we're
apoyando,
doing
¿verdad?
here, and we
Pero
have
nosotros nos
political
paramos
support there.
en crear una comunidad digna y justa,
And we continue to
que
work
pueda
to create our
proveer lo
community,
necesario para que las familias
to develop our community,
trabajadoras
to bring dignity to our
puedan,
community,
puedan
so
existir
that
con
the families
dignidad
can live here
y
in
puedan
dignity,
obtener
that they can
la esperanza de un futuro mejor para
stay
nosotras
here
y
and have the
para
hope of a better
nuestros niños, ¿verdad?
future
Porque los
for
niños son
themselves
una
and
parte
for
muy
their children.
importante en nuestra lucha.
We're doing this all
Que hemos
because of
integrado
the
también, que
kids,
ellos
for
también
the
tienen una
children.
opinión y tienen el derecho
We
de
understand that they
participar y
have
de ejercer su
a
derecho, ¿verdad?
voice
A
and a
crear una
right in all of
comunidad.
this to be a part of their community
Ahorita
and
esos pleitos sí es de defender
be
en
engaged with
contra
their
de
community. And
lo
so
que ha pasado, ¿verdad? Pero también es de
there's a lot
crear
of challenges. Things have happened in the
una
past, but
posibilidad
the
y
idea is
eso
to
es a través
continue
de
to create,
enraizarnos en
to
nuestra
find
comunidad
new opportunities,
y proponer,
to ground ourselves in our own communities,
alternativas que
and
son
from there
hechas por
make
las
proposals
residentes. Y eso es
that we developed
en
ourselves.
términos de la tierra, cómo la vamos a trabajar
Focusing
y
on the
cómo
earth, how we're
vamos
going to
a
work
celebrar
the
juntos,
earth,
crear
how are we going to
espacios que
celebrate,
son seguros para las
how we're
familias,
going to create spaces
alternativas en ese
for the
aspecto,
families,
pelear por la vivienda, porque
how
si
we're
no
going
podemos
to
pelear
continue
por
struggling
mejores
for
salarios en este
our
momento por las
housing and for better
condiciones, ¿verdad?
wages.
Pero sí podemos pelear por la vivienda
That's
que se
something
quede,
that we can
que
continue
se
to do.
quede affordable y que sea para las familias
The struggle
trabajadoras
for
y para
affordable
los
housing
niños.
is important for the
Sacar a la
families, for the
industria
children,
que no debe de
and
estar aquí,
also pushing out the industry. It
que
shouldn't
no
be here.
contamine las tierras y trabajar
It's been
sanar eso
contaminating the
y
earth.
cómo se ve esa
And so now
comunidad
we need to
digna y
focus on
justa
how
durante
we're going
estos
to
tiempos difíciles,
heal
¿verdad?
from that
Que se
and
están
how we're going to
poniendo más
focus now
difícil en términos
in dignity,
de la
particularly as
administración
things
y de
get
las
more
cosas que están
difficult
pasando,
in the context
pues
of this
para
administration
en ese
and
camino largo que vamos.
in as things
Y
are
pues,
developing in the long haul.
gracias.
Thank you.
Yo creo al último si tienen preguntas, ¿verdad? Pero
And if there are any questions
gracias
later,
por la
I'll be
oportunidad
happy to respond.
de contribuir y pues
Thanks for
de
this
decir
opportunity
cómo
to
estamos luchando
contribute
aquí
and
después
to talk about
de lo que nos
how we're
pasó,
moving
¿verdad?
forward
Aquí en
our
la
struggle
frontera.
here and what's been happening here at the border. Thank you.
Gracias, Hilda. Thank you so much, Hilda. Really, powerful and impactful and important work that you're doing down in El Paso with La Mujer Obrera. And seeing all the, it's great to see folks in the chat and then with the reactions. And thank you for making those really important connections between the fight for working people, for working women, for families, and the fight for like environmental protection as well. All of these things are very linked. So thank you. And again, please keep putting your questions in the Q&A feature as we go along. And thank you again to all our incredible speakers who are all doing really impactful work on the ground in the communities that have been most impacted by NAFTA and by the USMCA. So again, please get your questions in the Q&A feature. Before we get into the Q&A, I'd like to welcome Tania Del Moral from Global Exchange to talk about a recent Trinational organizational sign-on letter signed by over 150 organizations, some of whom are on this call, demanding that trade ministers in the 3 countries center the needs of working people, not the narrow interests of corporate elites in renegotiation of the USMCA. I'll pass it off to Tania, and again, please continue to put your questions in the Q&A.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Tania Del Moral, and I'm Global Exchange's Advocacy Coordinator. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. I'm Chicana, and I have deep roots in the U.S. and Mexico, so this battle is deeply personal, and I hear you, Hilda. I empathize, and we're in this struggle together. And although my generation wasn't around to march with you all in the Battle of Seattle, we are here now, and we're witnessing the devastating effects that so-called free trade has brought to our societies. From data centers drying up communities' water and land to thousands of people being laid off, as we've heard from Vito and Hilda and Rosario. Over the past 30 years, we've had these free trade agreements in place. So this struggle really touches us all. I'll be presenting, like Julie said, on the Trinational Statement, which over 150 organizations across the 3 countries signed on to. If your organization hasn't signed on already, and if you want to see the letter, my colleague will be inserting those links in the chat. And I hope that by the end of this presentation, you'll want to sign on and take action with us. And if you're an individual, we also have a resource for you as well. So please, Clayton, please insert that link in the chat. And yeah, let's get into it. We know that international solidarity makes things happen. Without it, people in each country will have to face off alone against corporate giants and trade rules already rigged against them. These corporations and government actors know that we're getting a worse deal than we were promised. They know that there's so much to improve on. However, we in the US are at a critical juncture in our democracy. We have a president who would rather invest billions in war than allow policies that will actually benefit working people. The Trump administration is holding other countries, not only Canada and Mexico, in complete subordination, and if they don't follow suit, he invades or starts wars with them. So this critical juncture presents us with an opportunity to build bridges across sectors, countries, and languages like never before. And together we can dream of a sustainable and a peaceful future for ourselves and generations to come. So with this spirit, I'd like to explain how this letter came together. When we first started organizing around these shared principles, we recognized that across all 3 countries, there's a shared demand. Trade must work for the people, not corporations. But as you know, each country brings distinct priorities. In the case of the US, over 600 organizations and 40,000 people came together to push for a deal that stops job offshoring, raises wages, addresses migration, reins in big tech, removes investor privileges, and lowers medicine costs. As we know, it's so important here in the US. As for Canada, labor organizations are focused on making trade enforceable and equitable with stronger labor enforcement, action on forced labor, gender equity, and also expanding the rapid response mechanism across all 3 countries. And I'll explain what the rapid response mechanism is a little bit later. Last but not least, in Mexico, a broad coalition of grassroots, labor, and indigenous and Afro-descendant groups under what we call the National Assembly for Advocacy in the TEMEC, or the CUSMA, or the USMCA, however you call it. We're advancing a human rights-centered agenda. So under this umbrella, we're linking what we've talked about in this call: labor, migration, agriculture, environment, and security. And so their priorities include protecting small farmers and food sovereignty, specifically relating to seeds, strengthening labor rights, and also addressing, gun violence and militarization, as well as ending the investor-state dispute mechanisms. So while the focus varies a little bit, jobs and corporate power in the US, enforcement and equity in Canada, and human rights and sovereignty in Mexico, the overlap is clear. We need stronger labor rights. And so you'll see in the towards the bottom of the sections, one of the first points that we have is rural communities. So we know that the first Trump administration promised that the USMCA would deliver wins for US farmers and ranchers. But, you know, even though exports of many of the commodities that Trump named actually did increase, the food trade deficit with Mexico and Canada grew by almost 30% over the last 6 years. And what that looks like on the ground is that, you know, as Hilda mentioned, consumer food prices are higher than ever, while the prices actually paid to farmers in 3 countries are way below their production costs. And then what that looks like in Mexico is that the national demand against genetically modified corn or GMO corn is a historical and cultural fight. And essentially, Mexico is trying to phase out the imports of GMO corn for human consumption in order to protect the native corn biodiversity as well as public health. We know that GMOs are not good for our healths. However, the US is placing immense pressure on Mexico since it exports yellow GMO corn to Mexico for livestock feed. Essentially, this first point on rural communities, we argue that a revised USMCA must safeguard governments' rights to manage agricultural supplies at fair prices, especially when it comes to corn, beans, dairy, and other foods. We also need to safeguard farmers' ability to save and exchange seeds, and also adopt policies that discourage overproduction, threats to biodiversity, and as I mentioned before, public health. We also need to increase transparency, including labeling measures that show how and where food is produced. So that's on the side of how to help and revitalize rural communities. Second off, you know, as a recurring theme of this call, we also want to improve conditions for workers. Companies continue to shift production to wherever wages are lowest, creating a race to the bottom. In Mexico alone, manufacturing wages remain 40% lower than in China and 88% lower than in the United States, according to a recent report from Rethink Trade. And migrant workers across the 3 countries face unsafe conditions and limited protections. So tools like the Rapid Response Mechanism, which essentially is a labor enforcement tool that provides for the investigation and the remediation of worker rights violations, specifically when it comes to collective bargaining and freedom of association. And so, you know, however, this mechanism heavily favors the US using it against Mexican facilities, and it has limited applications against US or Canadian companies. And despite the success of the mechanism, and this was a mechanism that was implemented under the USMCA differently than NAFTA, it is losing impact. And we know that 11 of the 32 cases presented under the Rapid Response Mechanism, they're not being resolved without meaningful remedies, and especially before investigations are even completed. So we're just asking for this mechanism that's already in place to be enforced as it should, and also to extend it to US and Canadian companies. Thirdly, we want to take environmental crises, Afro-descendant and Indigenous rights seriously. We know that North America is already facing extreme climate impacts. We've seen droughts affecting agriculture to wildfires across Canada and the Western US, yet trade rules allow extractive projects that threaten Indigenous and Afro-descendant territories, often without their consent. So we argue that we need to expand the enforcement mechanisms like the Rapid Response Mechanism to environmental harms. And we also need to get rid of what's called ISDS, or the Investor State Dispute Settlement. And essentially, this investor state dispute settlement allows corporations to sue governments for infringing on their rights, which is ironic, as you know. In the case of a friend, an indigenous leader off the Yucatan coast, Quetzal Sab, a US mining company used ISDS to demand $500 million from Mexico after the Mexican government restricted its operations due to the destruction of our friend's environment and territory. So, that's ironic saying that this company is infringing on their rights. So, or more so that Mexico is infringing on this company's rights. Fourthly, we also want to remove giveaways to big tech. More and more, we see that artificial intelligence begins to replace workers across sectors, steal our data, and even use it to kill targets of war, like in Iran, with large margins of error. So we need to be aware of this and fight back. The digital trade rules we have now severely limit government's ability to regulate data, to tax large tech companies, or even to enforce antitrust laws. And so this affects everything from data privacy to farmers' ability to repair their own equipment. And so we argue that trade agreements should not lock in the rules that benefit a handful of corporations at the expense of public oversight. Last but not least, we thought that it was important to include the issue of gun violence in this letter. Firearms trafficked from the US into Mexico are a major driver of violence and displacement. I'll give you this fact alone. In 2023, a survey found that 88% of the 180,000 migrants from Mexico coming to the US that year were fleeing violence. So if we really want to address the conditions of migrant workers across North America, we must address the reasons why they leave. So if Trump actually wants to go against the cartels, like he said he's wanted to in the past, then he would immediately stop the flow of weapons and ammo crossing the border every day. 369 firearms cross the US border into Mexico every day through trafficking. And when it comes to Canada, 90% of the firearms that are found in crime scenes are trafficked from the US. So governments can do this by considering a new chapter on arms that contains provisions to better control and trace firearms and ammunition traded within North America. So that's, the points of the letter are, I know it's a lot of information. Feel free to click on the links and, ask questions in the chat. We're happy to answer them. And I'll just finish off by saying that this letter is a labor of love that grew out of the need for an international united front against these rigged trade policies, against the people. And so now that we're here, we're on this call, it's time to show up and to take action. So, please refer to the petition links that are in the chat. And thank you so much for having me. I'll now pass it on to Grisel Bello Cuecuecha, who wasn't able to join us at the beginning of for our land acknowledgement, but she is here now. She is a land defender for the indigenous Nahuatl community of Tlaxcala, and she belongs to the People's Movement for Peace and Justice. I'll pass it on to you, Grisel. Thank you.
Buenas tardes a todos o buenas noches en el lugar que se encuentren. Así es, como ya lo
Greetings to
dijeron mis
everyone,
compañeros que me
wherever you
antecedieron,
are.
creo que
As
la
my
lucha desde
previous
nuestras
colleagues were
comunidades,
saying,
desde nuestros
the
pueblos,
struggles that we have
pues la hemos
in our
defendido
communities,
como
our
antes lo hacían
people's
nuestros
struggles,
abuelos, desde la
we have been
organización,
able to see how
organizándonos
our
en pequeños
grandparents and our
grupos o en
ancestors
grandes movimientos
confronted
como
such
ahora lo
things,
estamos
organizing
viendo.
themselves,
No tendrían
confronting
por
the
qué,
challenges
porque
of their
desde
day.
los tratados de libre
Because
comercio o
of
los
free trade
tratados que se han
agreements,
hecho
because
o
of
desde las constituciones
agreements or
políticas de
constitutions
muchos
that
de
have been
nuestros pueblos y
established
países, se habla de un
throughout
medio ambiente sano,
countries,
en donde, como
so
ahora
many
lo
of
está
these talk
diciendo,
about
el cambio climático nos afecta a todo,
a
desde
good
la
environment, a
agricultura,
healthy environment.
y de
And now
ahí
we know
que
that
nuestros
everything is
paisanos
being
tengan que ir
impacted,
a otro lugar a
the
buscar el
agriculture.
alimento.
And this is why
Desde
some of our
también
family members have
nuestras
had to leave their
comunidades
homes
en
and looking
donde
for work elsewhere.
Como ya lo dije,
Peoples
desde la historia hemos sido marginados
are the ones that are
y que bueno,
historically
nunca hemos sido
get pushed
escuchados del
aside
todo.
and are
Nunca
marginalized and not
hemos
listened
sido
to.
reconocidos también. Ahora nos unimos
Even
también a
though
este
now we're
movimiento,
being
a esta
recognized,
lucha, en
we're now
donde
unite,
hablamos de una defensa de un
we're now
territorio, de
joining
una
this
defensa del agua, de una
campaign,
defensa de
this
los
movement
árboles,
to
de una
defend
defensa
water,
de los
to
trabajadores,
defend
de
the
una
forests,
defensa
to defend
de innumerables cosas que
the
por el simple hecho
defenders, the
quizás de ser
territorial defenders
seres
and
humanos,
activists.
tendríamos todos que defender.
As human beings, we should all be
Ahora
defending
también las transnacionales,
these
como lo
needs
están
because they
diciendo, nos
impact us
están
all.
ganando. Porque estos derechos a los que hemos
Right
tenido
now,
de
as we've
tener
heard,
un
they're getting the
medio
best of
ambiente
us.
sano,
The
pues no
rights
se
that we
están llevando
have
a cabo.
to
En nuestra comunidad y en
have a
nuestro
clean
territorio
environment, they're not
siempre hemos sido
committing
defensores.
themselves to
Siempre
those.
hemos dicho,
And we've
creo que
always said
nuestros modos de trabajo
our
en el
way of
campo, en el
living and
trabajo,
of working in the
han sido
fields,
quienes nos han mantenido durante
that's
muchos
what
años al
has
frente
sustained us
de
for
nuestros
so many
territorios,
years
teniendo
in our
un
own
medio
lands
ambiente sano, teniendo
and
una
having
alimentación
a
sana,
very
como
healthy
ya lo dijeron.
environment and healthy
Nuestro
communities.
movimiento también viene desde el maíz,
Our
viene
movement
también
is also
desde
grounded
ahora
in
muchos
corn.
proyectos que se están
So
dando por
many of the
movilidad. Sí es
projects
cierto
that are
que
being developed,
tenemos en nuestros países, pero que creo que el hecho de no hacer una consulta previa es lo que nos
many
lleva
of
a
these
seguirnos organizando, a
are
decir,
sometimes
nos hace falta más
moved forward
árboles, nos
without
hace falta un aire
a,
limpio en
a
nuestras
consent
comunidades, en
process.
nuestros
And so we
pueblos, en
miss
nuestros
opportunities to have
países, y no
conversations
necesitamos
where we can
movilidad,
express
no
ourselves and
necesitamos quizás que
also talk about our other needs, for instance,
trasplanten, perdón,
transportation
árboles que ya llevan
or
mucho tiempo en nuestros pueblos, en nuestras
the need
comunidades,
for
principalmente en
vegetation in our
ciudades en
communities.
donde ya no vemos tantos
Particularly
lugares
in
verdes,
cities,
¿no?
you don't see any green
Entonces,
spaces
pues
there.
como lo dice la compañera,
And so,
los
as our colleague
compañeros
was
también que me
saying,
antecedieron, los
and the other
movimientos que
panelists,
ahora se
it's
están
through
dando
our
son gracias
movements,
a la organización desde
it's
nuestros
through
pueblos. Y
our
esa es la manera que ahora estamos
organization
luchando. Nos unimos a cada uno
that
de
we're
los
coming together
movimientos y a
and
cada uno
we're
de los
seeing different
compañeros
results.
que me
That's why we're
antecedieron,
joining and
dieron
showing
su punto de
solidarity
vista
with all
desde
of the
los
struggles that we've heard
trabajadores,
about
desde
today,
también incluso
taking into
incluir
consideration the
a
perspective
las
of
personas
workers
también que se unen por
and
una
taking the time to
pues
listen
una
to
desdicha que tuvieron
those
también al
persons
perder algún familiar,
that
desde toda
lost a
esta
family member or
militarización,
have
desde
had some
ahora
other
también
experienced some other
defensores que hemos
misfortune.
tenido, creo que no solo en México, sino en
I know
otros
that it's
países
not
o
just in
lugares
Mexico,
del
there's
mundo que por
other places
defender
throughout
también
the
el medio
world
ambiente,
that
desgraciadamente
people
ahora no están. Pero que por el legado
defend
de
their
ellos y por el legado de
environment
todos y cada
and
uno de
then
ustedes
they
que
no
ahora
longer
luchan desde
exist.
su lugar, estamos aquí presentes.
And we're all
Me uno
fighting
a su
from wherever
lucha,
we're at.
nos unimos a su
I
voz
join your
y
struggle,
sabemos que
my
su
voice
voz es
joins
nuestra
your
voz, que no
voice,
estamos
and your
solos
voice
y
will
que
be
desde nuestra
also my
trinchera
voice.
seguimos adelante.
We're all together here, and that's how we'll move forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Grisel, and thank you, Tanya. Really great. I mean, all this solidarity, right? I hope everyone's feeling super inspired by all of this. So I want to move in now to our Q&A, question and answer section. We're gonna pose a few questions here. If folks haven't had a chance to put their question in the Q&A, please do. Things that, might not be answered right now, we'll certainly follow up with folks after the fact. And then after that, we'll go right into action items. So I also see this question is for really any of the speakers or any of the panelists today, but wondering what is the biggest difference you see on the ground when comparing your communities pre-NAFTA, right? So like pre-1993 to now. So I'll leave that to the panelists if anyone has some thoughts.
I can comment if you like. So when we talk about our community, our Brampton community, and like I said, I was hired at the plant back in 92. So 92 till now, there were many businesses that opened in that area where the plant was, like a eatery, like a barber shop or a hair salon. And you see a lot of those things now not there anymore. And it wasn't not there anymore only like 10, 15 years ago. It's not there anymore as of over the past 2-3 years, because our plant has been going through what it's going through, and 3,000, over 4,000 workers not being there. So the cascading of that and the impact of how that multiplies from one worker. And when we talk about our auto industry, it's a 1 to 12 ratio, if not higher, as far as how many people affects down the line that when that auto worker is not working or laid off or lost their jobs. So I definitely see a big impact in the community and the city of Brampton since '92 till now, for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, super important, right? The ripple effects, ripple communities, right? Oftentimes these plants are like, the center of the community, and once jobs are outsourced or offshored or plants closed or whatever it looks like, that certainly has ripple effects throughout the entire community. Any other thoughts from panelists about their communities pre NAFTA, pre 1990s to now? I'll say, obviously, I mentioned this report before, but there's a report that recently came out from the New York Times, if I'm not mistaken, that did show that folks's, Americans' life expectancy has gone down from, since NAFTA by about a year on average. So, I think, that's incredibly significant. And obviously that's an average, but, certainly like other kind of layers within that, right? That's even more, could be even more. Another question we have in the Q&A here is from Mary. What's the best lobby strategy for members of the public? Is Washington Fair Trade gathering a group to meet with our senators? Should we join or recruit our own group? So I can take that. Obviously in terms of like lobbying strategy or strategy for members of the public, I think that obviously depends on the communities that folks are in, and we will have a section right after this Q&A about the ways that individuals can get involved. I can say in terms of the Washington Fair Trade Coalition, in terms of the lobby strategy, the USMCA will not, how should I say this? It won't necessarily go to a vote in Congress. We might have to push for Congress members to force a vote. So that will certainly be part of our effort. And I can reach out to you, Mary, about gathering, groups of constituents to make sure that our senators and representatives are demanding a vote on the USMCA. Again, I'm not sure, how that would look like in Canada or Mexico. Maybe folks have some thoughts on that, but it's just kind of a continuation of this undemocratic process. That it wouldn't even go to a vote in Congress. So we certainly need to push for that. I don't know if folks have anything to say there.
I can speak for the coalition of the Assembly of Organizations from Mexico. As for Mexico, one of the struggles that we've had is even getting in the room when it comes to the negotiations between the governments and the corporations. We have a list of demands that we've sent over and over again, and expecting to have meetings with the Secretary of Economy, for example. However, we have not been received. And the government has basically said that these consultations are in progress. However, again, we haven't heard back from them. And so for us in Mexico, it's really important for us to keep pushing on us to, be in the public view of these of our government in Mexico, and for us to hear and to listen and to share from other communities who are being impacted across Mexico, and to amplify that in the public. So one of the strategies that the Assembly is taking on now is to amplify as much as possible on social media, in communications to press, that we're not being heard and that we are uniting trinationally, and that we are, we have a force behind us, and so we need to be at the table. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would love to take more questions, but I am, I am looking at the time here, and I want to make sure we get to one of the big things, which is how folks here can get involved. So certainly we can connect with folks offline, and connect folks with the different groups. I know I saw a question in the Q&A about what the process looks like in Canada and how folks can get involved there. And so we will certainly be making those connections, but I do want to move into kind of the action item portion. So thank you again so much to our speakers and all of you for asking such insightful questions. We hope that after all of this talk of solidarity and community, you feel inspired to join us in our call for cross-border solidarity in the face of rigged trade. And there are many ways for you to get involved. First and foremost, as we mentioned earlier in this program, throughout May and June, activists and civil society organizations throughout the US, Mexico, and Canada are mobilizing in days of solidarity that reject attempts to pit working people against one another, and kind of show solidarity cross-border. Many of these days of solidarity events will gather folks not only across issue areas, but actually across borders. So we're now going to get some live updates from organizers on the ground planning these days of solidarity events and how you can get involved. I'm going to start off first. I'll give an update about what's going on in Washington State. We'll be hosting a Pacific Northwest cross-border Day of Solidarity event. It's going to be a community celebration and rally for a People's Trade agenda on Saturday, May 30th, up at Peace Arch Park, which for folks unfamiliar, it's a state park. It's right on the border between Washington and British Columbia, Canada. And what's really special about it is that folks from both sides of the border can come together, congregate, and celebrate in a true show of cross-border solidarity. So we'll be busing folks up from Washington, busing folks down from Vancouver and other places in British Columbia, and kind of come together and celebrate. We'll have like food, live music, signs, a rally with speakers, and so much more to both confront corporate rigged trade and also celebrate people's trade agenda that puts communities first. We'll be live streaming the event and hosting local watch parties for folks that may not want to travel to the border. So there'll be lots of different ways for folks to get involved. The cross-sector nature of this work is represented in who's helping us organize. We have some of the biggest unions in the state, like the Public Employees Union and the Food and Commercial Workers Union. We have community organizations like migrant defense groups and farmer organization, and just so many more folks. So we'd love for you to get involved if you are in the Pacific Northwest. I'll put a couple links in the chat for folks to get involved, because it's going to be super exciting. You can either RSVP, or if you're a local organization, you can endorse our Day of Action. I'm going to pass it off to a couple more folks to get some updates, and then we'll talk about like general action items. So stick with us here. I'll pass it off to Clayton Tucker to talk about an event being planned in El Paso.
Thank you, Julie. And thank you all for hanging in here with us. My name is Clayton Tucker. I am representing the Texas Fair Trade Coalition today and am with the Trade Justice Education Fund. We are having a very exciting event in El Paso with our good friends La Mujer Abrera and a couple other folks. And it's going to be a really good event. It will be a combination of El Paso and Juarez. And I just posted a link into the chat not too long ago. I'll have all the information there. Because look, y'all, El Paso and Juarez has been really hurt by NAFTA, and the USMCA is not helping it at all. So we'll be coming together. We'll be having a good time. I do remember the event starts at 9 a.m. at Cafe My Pond for folks who are in the El Paso area. Otherwise, again, we'll be posting a link in the chat. I see the links coming up now, and we will see y'all there.
Awesome. Super exciting. Thanks, Clayton. I'll now pass it to Mira Rubio from the California Trade Justice Coalition. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. My name is Mira Rubio, and I'm the coordinator for the California Trade Justice Coalition. And I want to share some details about our upcoming Days of Solidarity. Our mobilization is going to be in San Diego. We will be gathering this Saturday, June 27th at 11 a.m. at the Chicano Park Museum and Cultural Center, which is a wonderful venue filled with art. It's home to one of the largest concentrations of Chicano murals in the world. And we are very proud to be partnering with LACLA, which is the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement, and the San Diego Imperial County's Labor Council for this. And the goal of these Days of Solidarity is to demand that our governments are prioritizing the needs of communities over profits and corporations. And we're also there to show that we reject any attempts to pit working people in the US and Mexico against one another in a race to the bottom. And if you want to read more or RSVP, or if you have any specific questions, you're also welcome to email our director, Will, who's the lead organizer of this event, and I will put his email address in the chat. Thanks so much. We'd really value having you there. Great, super exciting. Finally, I pass it off to Jesse to talk about what's going on in New York.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Jesse Lane with the New York Trade Justice Coalition. We'll be rallying for People's Agenda for Trade in late June 30th in Buffalo, and be joined by our friends in Canada in Fort Erie across the river. We'll be able to see each other, but we won't be able to reach each other unless it's a really nice day and we want to go swimming. We'll be carpooling from Rochester and places around nearby as people sign up from Niagara Falls, from Erie, Pennsylvania, and from points in all directions. We're partnering with the AFL-CIO locally, and community groups, environmental groups, housing groups in Buffalo, along with anyone else that we can find that's interested. We're going to be joining the local No King's Day this Saturday and recruiting people to join us. The links that you've already seen in the chat, you can find information there. And I want to say a little bit about this, the Freedom Park, where we're having our side, the American side, has been sort of rededicated to the education around the Underground Railroad. So it's a connection that we're very happy to be making. Yeah, thank you all for your help, and I'll put my email in the chat in case anybody wants to reach out directly.
Yay, so exciting. Okay, well, thank you so much all. Lots of different ways to get involved. There are other events being planned in other cities across the US, Mexico, and Canada. So again, the website daysofsolidarity.org, that's been put in the chat. Hopefully some of my colleagues can put it in there again. That's where all these events are being posted. And if you're interested in organizing an action of your own, if you're not seeing your city represented, please let us know. A couple more action items. Hang tight with us, folks. Thank you all again so much. So again, on top of participating in the local Days of Solidarity events, something else you can do that will take you like 3 seconds is to sign the Trinational petition calling on trade negotiators from the US, Canada, and Mexico to prioritize the needs of people on the planet ahead of billionaires and corporations. The petition should be in the chat now. It's also on the Days of Solidarity website, but that'll be delivered to folks, to negotiators during the Days of Solidarity campaign. So the more voices on that petition, the stronger it will be. Finally, if you're part of an organization that's aligned with what we're talking about here, and you may want to endorse the Cross-Border Days of Solidarity Against Trump's Rigged Trade campaign. So again, there'll be a link in the chat with how to endorse that. Your organization will be prominently displayed on our website and will be part of the greater call for trinational solidarity. So quick recap. Attend and or spread the word about our local Days of Solidarity actions or create your own. Again, let us know if you want to do that. Sign the petition calling on negotiators to prioritize the needs of people on the planet, and also send it to some friends, and get your organization to endorse the call for cross-border Days of Solidarity. All of this information, again, can be found on the Days of Solidarity website, and it will also be emailed to all registrants. So we're hitting right up against time here. So I just want to say thank you all again for spending this evening or late afternoon with us. We hope that you feel inspired to join us in our call for cross-border solidarity in the face of increasing attacks on workers, migrant communities, human rights advocates, and many others. Solidarity in community is really the only solution that keeps movements alive and organizing against these forces. So we hope you'll join us in our celebration of that. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll be in touch soon, and thank you all for helping put this on and making this such a successful event. Thank you, everyone. Good evening, I suppose, or good night in whatever time zone you're in.
Thank you. See you all.
Thank you.